like to thank everyone that's on the live chat. We appreciate your contribution. We appreciate the comments. And, of course, hit that like button. Got Joe Hunk on the line from the Fallout, 7:40 a.m. Joe, we hope you've been working out because we're going to have you doing double duty tonight. You got to help us out with Auburn. You got to help us out with Alabama, too.
I had a feeling you might ask me about that. I had a feeling that you may ask me a little Alabama stuff, which is so much easier to talk about than Auburn because everything's fine. Everything's always amazing. They're just getting ready to find somewhere they can add another national championship trophy.
Okay, we'll ease into it then. We'll let you work up into it, and then you can put your thinking cap on for later. Let's start with Alabama. What would be the concern? If you could narrow it down to one concern, from what I'm hearing, it's maybe the defensive backfield heading into 2019 based on what we saw against the better teams, i.e. Clemson, and second half against Oklahoma in the college football playoffs. That would be the place where Nick Saban needs to do some work.
Well, you've got two sides to this. You've got the part about Savion Smith. You've got Deontay Thompson leaving. Those are the two when you talk about the secondary, what you need to be looking for. But the biggest thing for Alabama isn't even between the white lines. It has nothing to do with the 22 to 33 football players that are going to be on the field. The biggest question mark coming in with Alabama, if there's one, because look, I've been in this state doing sports talk radio for over 6 or 7 years. It doesn't matter what happens at that university. Everything is always fine. I said that just a few seconds ago, but that really is the truth. I mean, any other university, if I were to tell you that they lose 2 to 3 different linemen, all of which could be first or second round draft picks coming up in a few weeks, you would be going, "Oh, this offensive line is going to be horrible." Oh, well, you lose Jonah Williams. Oh, it's okay. We've got somebody behind him. Oh, you're losing Ross Pierce-Baker. Oh, we've got somebody behind him. That's kind of how Alabama works. You lose somebody like not just one tight end, but both of them in Irv Smith and Hell Hinches. Oh, we're going to be fine. You lose a senior running back in Damian Harris that came back to be a leader on this team, came back to win a national championship. That's all right. We've got Najee Harris. We even have a guy named Brian Robinson that we're all in love with. So it keeps happening and this ball keeps rolling. The problem is for Alabama fans, it's 2 words: Steve Sarkisian. That's the question mark. It is. And it doesn't just have to do with the national championship game, because you mentioned the one against Clemson. Alabama fans are still upset about the one 2 years ago when he was the OC, and you can go to the pick play and you can look at all that as the reason why they lost, but they blame that loss on him. He goes to the NFL where he just happens to go to a team that has one Alabama wide receiver in Julio Jones, and then they draft a second Alabama wide receiver. And we watched it last season where, again, your star players, especially one that could be considered one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and Julio Jones, doesn't get the football, doesn't at all get the football. And, I mean, you were in preseason games. I mean, we're talking about August. It's 105 degrees. The Falcons are playing some, game that has the third-string wide receiver playing and the third-string quarterback, and people in Atlanta and Atlanta fans who just happen to also be here around the river region where I am are calling for Sarkisian's head. And then this guy at the end of the season comes back to Alabama to be the OC. That's the biggest question mark because of the bad taste that was in Alabama fans' mouth coming from Tampa in that national championship game.
Got Joe Hunk on the line. You can catch him on Montgomery's 7:40 a.m. His show is The Fallout. So situated there in Montgomery, how far are you from Auburn University?
We are exactly where I'm at right now, where I live. We are at exit 9 on the interstate, where Alabama, or I should say where Auburn is exit 51. So I'm roughly about 41, 42 miles. In fact, I went over for the Auburn basketball game on Saturday. It took me 45 minutes to get there. It took me 45 minutes to get back. It's a really quick trip.
And then from Tuscaloosa, how far?
In Montgomery, we are about 2 hours away. The unfortunately, because we're in Alabama, the back roads are the best way to go. And so there's a little 2-lane road that we take up from Montgomery to Tuscaloosa. It takes 2 hours. And trust me, if you get behind an 18-wheeler, it's not too much fun.
Now, people that watch me on a regular basis here know that I worked in Mississippi at a
Mhm.
CBS station for 6 years covering the SEC. So my trips into Alabama were typically the half hour to Tuscaloosa from
Yep.
across the Mississippi state line. Sometimes I would have to go to Birmingham. So it wasn't that bad, but I can relate to what you just mentioned because one time I drove to a buddy's house to spend the weekend and he was in Daytona, Florida. So I drove from Columbus, Mississippi
Yep.
to what, if you're from the north and you go to the south, and even though I'd been down there for a few years, I thought, you know what, Mississippi, Florida, is it that big a deal? And this is
Mhm.
this is 20 years ago, before the GPS, the advent of the GPS to that extent. So yes, my overnight run through the winding roads of the back roads of Alabama was quite
Yeah.
the adventure, with it pouring down rain in the middle of February, I think it was.
I've actually made that trip to Daytona Beach, and
Okay.
wait, there were still some back roads that was the best way the GPS told us to go. So I'm pretty sure I've driven down those exact same roads, and if you get behind an 18-wheeler, you just might as well just kick your feet up and relax because it's going to be a long drive.
Joe Hunk from 740 AM The Fallout is his show. So, Joe, when we look at Tua, there was a point based on what he accomplished at the national championship game in 2017, based on the way that this offense operated without flaw, seemingly through the regular season, that he at that point was being, and it seemed a fairly legitimate statement, being talked about as the greatest college quarterback of all time.
Mhm.
Then he struggles against Georgia and doesn't look so great in the national championship game. After the first quarter, he did have the pick six, but he really steamrolled that offense down the field another 3 drives, and then had all sorts of issues. So, are Alabama fans kind of pumping the brakes on Tua? Is the greatest of all time kind of talk?
Well, no, they still do consider him right now arguably the greatest quarterback of all time when it comes to Alabama football. And the way they look at the Georgia game and the way that they look at that Clemson game all come down to the shin and the injury and the surgery that he had to have after the Georgia game. And so this is a football player that, when 100% healthy, was, I don't want to say unstoppable, but it kind of was. And I know it was a really bad movie, but remember, if you had imagine if you've never seen a DC Comics and you had never seen anything and you didn't even know who Superman was, and you watched 5 different Superman movies and they had never used kryptonite, and he just destroyed them, and that's the way that it looks. And then you get to Batman versus Superman, which again, very bad movie, I understand, but you get to that moment where Batman uses kryptonite for the very first time, and he punches Superman, and everybody, wait a second, he's hurt. Like that's what happens. That's what happened in the national championship game, or that's what happened in the Georgia game. And then you go to the national championship, and there's some question marks, and you're like, okay, we know that this can happen, but we don't really believe this is the case. And you still saw that he wasn't 100%, but he was about 75 to 80%, which you would have took that over a Jalen Hurts, or you would have took that over a Mac Jones. Look, the University of Alabama loves Jalen Hurts. They love everything about him. In fact, yesterday, Oklahoma tweeted out a picture of Jalen Hurts in his Oklahoma gear with the number 1 on his jersey, and he's flexing, and he's like, it's go time. There's Alabama fans that were commenting on it like, man, this really hurts. That wasn't the case 5 and 6 months ago when they wanted Jalen gone because they wanted Tua to play and they wanted him to be the all-time starter. But you look at how that SEC championship game went, and Jalen basically went out, won that game for Alabama to get them into the college football playoff and into the national championship. And it was something that everybody at Alabama was like, you know what? Tua is our guy, but we really appreciate everything that you did for us as a quarterback, and go ahead and go. Now Alabama fans just hope that they don't see Oklahoma in the college football playoff for the national championship. But if Tua is healthy, they're definitely going to like their chances, especially if you have a Jerry Jeudy and you do have Henry Ruggs and Devontae Smith is playing like he normally does. Because trust me, going back to that national championship game, I still sit here and think about how on earth did any of that happen? Like, you hear the talk, and there were certain players that would say, look, Josh Jacobs even said it. He said, look, we got on that field and I could tell we didn't have the mentality that we needed to go win that national championship. And you can kind of hear that. A.J. McCarron talked a little bit about that after Alabama lost against Oklahoma after losing the kick 6 games to Auburn. But still at the same time, you're Alabama. You're supposed to be, nobody can beat you. And to see that game happen against Clemson, there's some Alabama fans, and I believe a lot of Alabama players that want to get back, want to play in that national championship game again, and want to play against Clemson.